And thank you all for staying with us. We're now going to talk about another buzzword, brand. We're going to talk about building your brand, creating your niche in the game. So I will have these two gentlemen to introduce themselves and then we'll get started.
So my name is Wilson Chaney. I am a recent graduate of Texas Southern University, and I'm the founder of UFM TV, which has been in business since 2021. We're a news network centered on publication, podcasting, videography, and content creation. And it's something that we really pride ourselves on is presenting the right news that nobody else wants to talk about in mainstream media. And I am also the host of the In My Humble Opinion podcast, which has been around since 2019. And it's a sports podcast that falls under the same umbrella as UFM TV as well. And throughout my tenure in this business, I have the opportunity to connect with a ton of people in the industry, such as Kenny Smith on Inside the NBA, TJ Adeshola, who used to be a former head of global partnerships at Twitter, and among others as well. And I managed to be blessed enough to have contacts with them, and they helped me a lot during the process.
Awesome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew White. I am the sports marketing director for Norfolk State University. I am a Hampton University graduate, and prior to joining Norfolk State in January of this year, I was the director of university relations for Hampton University, so managed all of the PR, multimedia, social media for the university, and really had a wide-ranging experiences both from an academic side, worked with the previously mentioned Mr. Marshall and Dr. Jackson and their roles as AD and SWA, as well as working directly with the president, working with the student leadership, working with the alumni, working with outside media. So you can imagine just every different channel and frequency. We touched them and had a, as you can imagine, in the realm of academia, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it was quite an experience and one I learned a lot from and pride myself on what I learned in that aspect. And look forward to a good discussion here today.
Okay. Awesome. So both of you gentlemen are in the public eye, constantly dealing with the media, dealing with the public. So how important is it for you in those roles, in creating your own personal brand, to really be authentic? We talked a lot about authenticity in the sessions prior. So how important is it for you to really be authentic? I mean, a lot of times you see people on TV and in the media, they are characters. And when you meet them in person, they're totally different. But I think in the roles that you're talking about, you need to be authentic. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll go first. So from a PR perspective, it's crucial, right? So you hear the term gatekeeper a lot, and my job was the gatekeeper for the president, the board of trustees. At one juncture at Hampton, I was also serving as the acting SID at the same time. So I was a gatekeeper for the athletic director and the entire coaching staff and student athletes. So one thing that really helped me from a personal branding standpoint was I would just have candid, real conversations with reporters, with constituent groups, because they want to know the tea, right? Everyone wants to know what's going on. But my job, as I always used to joke with people, I called myself Oliver Pope, right? Remember, everyone watched Scandal. So it wasn't always about, burying the bodies or making sure no one found them. It was giving the reporters or that media person who has their own job in reporting a story, developing that relationship, right? So it's like, okay, I can't answer that question exactly how you want me to, but I'm going to be real with you and transparent enough that you're going to have something that you can air on the 5 o'clock news, because there's going to be a time where I'm calling you to say, hey, we've got a new AD we're introducing, or we have a new head coach, or there's some event that one of our student athletes is a part of. Like when I was at Hampton, one of the football players signed an NIL deal with WWE. If you know pro wrestling, WWF, Hulk Hogan, The Rock, all that. That student athlete was the first from any HBCU in the country to sign one of those deals. And it was great, but at the same time, it wasn't like news. So I had to, with the relationship that I had developed over almost 7 years with the different reporters and all that, was to call them up and say, hey, because of our relationship, it's not quid pro quo, but it kind of is. It's like, hey, I've got this story. This is kind of a big deal because, wrestling is big. WrestleMania had just happened a few weeks ago. So it was still in the spotlight. So you got to kind of barter, almost kind of have that relationship. It's give and take, right? So that's why my personal brand, to get to your question, is I have to have that with you in order for you to trust me that I'm going to give you something. And that it's not just always going to be no comment. I'm not going to answer that. No, neither is the coach, neither is the student. If you have that relationship from a personal branding standpoint, you can really help those reporters when they need help and when you need to get a story placed. Because a lot of times as administrators, minus Dr. Jackson here, who say, hey, I want this on the news, or I want this in the paper, and you're looking at it from a news value standpoint like, okay. And then I can lean on that relationship with the reporter because they're going to do me that favor.
I'm actually really glad you started with that question because one of our biggest slogan for UFM is this is where storytelling and authenticity comes to life. And when it comes to authenticity, I feel like it's something that's severely lacking in the mainstream media today. And if I could ask a question real quick, by a show of hands, when was the most recent time you guys have watched ESPN in the past week?
This morning.
This morning?
This morning.
Okay. Have you guys noticed anything sort of lacking when it comes to storytelling? Because from my viewpoint, I feel like it's more of an entertainment standpoint rather than telling the news. And I feel like that's where UFM TV comes in. And one big thing about us is we have several podcasts under our umbrella, such as my personal one, for example. And we try to touch on the personal news that's not portrayed on the media. For example, I did a podcast episode where I talked about being the hidden bias of drug testing in the NBA. For example, when Donovan Mitchell scored 71 points, the next day he got drug tested. Damian Lillard scored 60, he got drug tested. But at the same time, Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic, whom I have great respect for, they could drop 40-point triple-doubles, but they haven't got drug tested once. Why is that? It's little things that you have to think about. Also with the John Morant situation, everybody was dogging him for flashing a gun, but instead, from my perspective, I try to bring out a certain viewpoint where I compared him to a former New York star called Carlton Hines. And nobody knows about his name because he was a very popular high school player from New York, and he had a shoe-in D1 scholarship to Syracuse University. But he turned it down for one reason. He wanted to be in the streets. He was making $200,000 a day just for being in that lifestyle. And unfortunately, he lost his life at 23, the same age John Morant is now. So instead of just dogging him, I try to bring a certain viewpoint to where, here's a former star that nobody knows about because his life ended early, because he wanted to be in sports and in the streets. So if John Morant keeps going down that path, things like that. And when you look at sports entertainment media today, it's nothing but comparisons, who make the right free agency moves, does this game affect somebody's legacy, same old time debate topics. And I always tell people, everybody can be a journalist, but not everybody can be a storyteller. And it's a lost art that's not even practiced in the field anymore. So I feel like that's where our authenticity comes into play. Because once we touch on stories like that, that's what makes it different. Because the mainstream media thinks that stuff is boring to talk about. They want something to draw in the audience. That's where shock value ratings is created. ESPN can tell you that our ratings are at its all-time high. But if you look at its subscribers from 2022 to now, they went from 8 million to 5 million. And it's for a very good reason. And that's why nowadays they're signing guys like Pat McAfee to their network, who has an independent network. You see what I mean? So it's really a digital shift that's happening as well, where authenticity is starting to make a comeback into that field. And guys like Fox and ESPN have no choice but to gravitate to people like us in order to produce storytelling. Because at the end of the day, they follow the same formula as us. They're just posting clips just to get virality on Twitter and Instagram. They're not telling a story. So, and what makes UFM so special as well, we have guys that are also have their own newsletters. One of my good friends, Jamel Matthews, he has his own newsletter called Unmatched Sports. And he emphasizes on the stories at Texas Southern as far as athletes. Right now, he is creating several podcast episodes featuring several TSU football players and getting their stories out there. And it's one of the things that we really pride ourselves on. And as far as journalism goes, it goes hand in hand with service. We try to portray that service as well. And our focus is giving back to our HBCUs. Because at the end of the day, the mainstream media is not going to do it for us. It's up to us to provide that spotlight into our athletic facilities, showing the world that, hey, we do have talent. And that's what us creating articles, podcasts, we're trying to do whatever we can to bring that story out there. And another good example I've been thinking of too, I got the opportunity last year to film for a Texas Southern Pro Day. And we have one athlete in there that garnered many looks from the NFL. As far as the Chicago Bears, Los Angeles Rams, San Francisco 49ers. I posted the Pro Day clip on UFM's Twitter account, and before you know it, it was featured on all blog sites. San Francisco, Chicago's, and everybody started to know about us. And it wasn't as individual highlights, it was the actual Pro Day itself. People from all across the states get to see what talent we have at Durley Stadium. But like I said before, the mainstream media is not going to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves and take it upon ourselves to put our stories out there and make it as authentic as possible for us to know who we really truly are. So I really like that question you asked at first.
And I liked your response. So that leads me, you kind of touched on this already, talking about your online and digital presence. In this day and age, we say that having an online presence is very important. But what type of, you talk about storytelling. So a lot of times people will say any PR is good PR. I don't necessarily agree with that. But what would be you all's take on that? And having that online presence and then being able to, I say script for lack of a better term, what it is that you're actually putting online.
Well, you talk about, is it important to have an online presence? To kind of piggyback off what you talked about the ESPN, it was all over the news, like about 20 people just got laid off. Part of that is because ESPN looks at what they're paying those individual talents and what are all the different channels they're engaging, right? Are they writing to the web? Are they producing viral videos? Are they commentating? You've got to check a lot of boxes nowadays. Or are you appearing on just one segment? Are you just on College Game Day? Or are you on First Take? Are you on SportsCenter? Are you on NBA Primetime? So now it's got to the point where if you're not checking 4 or 5 boxes for ESPN and you're above a certain threshold, you better be bringing in ratings like Stephen A. Smith, who still is on 2 or 3 different things. If you're wanting to be there, the day of, one guy making that or one lady making that kind of money and only doing one show, that's gone. You've got to show that reach. And kind of going back to the point you made earlier, and you also brought up Dr. Jackson, a lot of these commentators and figureheads, they're characters, like kind of like what I said before with like WWF. It's a gimmick. Like you don't really believe Skip Bayless and Stephen A. believes everything they say. It's all buzz clicks, buzz tweets to get you to retweet, to get you to comment back against them, because it's all an algorithm that's all being measured on what is or isn't trending. So, that's why you see Shannon Sharp flex his muscle. He hit a certain threshold and he got to a certain point where he was like, I just don't like where this has evolved into with Skip. So he left. I was just reading in between sessions. I think they're going to go on a 2-month break with Skip's show because they're having trouble replacing Shannon right now. And you can imagine with everything going on with NBA free agency, NFL training camps, about something like this is prime time for Fox to not have their best show on when they're already a distant second to ESPN as it is. But going back to your other point, you have to be in all of these different channels. Like how many people, show of hands, if I can still your gimmick, who's on Threads now? That just came out within the last, I just signed up for it last night, right? So like you have to be in these places, because if you're not in it, how are you going to be a part of the conversation, right? So one thing I learned when I was working at my previous institution, it's kind of like, how we always, that old slogan, the music video killed the radio star, right? Everything's always evolving, always growing, always changing. Well, as an old millennial, it's one of the OGs. We had MySpace, which, we don't even talk about that anymore. Facebook has evolved, and that's kind of become where I remember before, being in college in the early 2000s, recruiters were like, oh, you don't need to be on Facebook, you don't need to be on these things because we're going to look up your social media when you apply for internships and jobs. Now that whole paradigm has shifted. If you're not on social media, they're like, what is wrong with you? Like, what rock do you live under, right? Because that's how we engage our clients and our customers. So that's where Facebook, being the old standard bearer, has kind of evolved into being that place of, we said, the more senior individuals. Then you had Twitter, and we could have a whole conference on Twitter right now, but Twitter was kind of the young people bread and butter. And then when you had the great Twitter, split, when you could no longer tag your pictures from Instagram directly to Twitter, and it started just producing a link, then you had a lot of people just run over to Instagram for the pictures, and now this whole new Threads Twitter beef is like East Coast, West Coast, bad boy, Death Row Records, that overnight they've said, okay, we're gonna just now come at Twitter. I'm not old enough to be on TikTok. So you just have to be in these places because something is always coming. But between now, a year from now, there's going to be something new out there. Twitch is a space that is big if you're a gamer or a content creator. I mean, everything is going to always grow and evolve and shift. I mean, so you have to answer your question. You've got to be in these places, but you have to understand what frequency or what age group or what demo you're going to be talking to on each one, because not all social media areas and apps are built the same. You're not going to get that same equity across. If I'm trying to get something out to my alumni at Norfolk State to come out for a fundraiser or event, I know I'm going to push heavy on Instagram. Not getting anything out of TikTok. I might get 2 people. And those are going to be those older individuals who are just technologically savvy. But if I want to get something in front of the students on my campus, I'm going to live on Instagram, I'm going to live on TikTok, and I'll put a little bit into Twitter. Facebook, if you put it out, that's going to be their parents or grandparents saying, hey, did you see this is going on? So you just got to know your frequency and who you're talking to, but you have to be there because there are different lanes for everybody.
So to follow up on the young guy to the OG millennial perspective, social media has really been a huge figment of not only my life, but people in my generation as well. Like, we go on social media every day more than the newspaper. And I feel like most times than not, we're in the middle of a digital revolution when it comes to how we consume news. Print media is dead. I mean, it could be an ignorant viewpoint, but you could just tell right now. People will go to Twitter before reading something on the Daily Beast or going to the store and just getting a newspaper. It's different now.
Does the store even carry the paper? I had plenty of times at my old job where the president, who was very much into tangible news, go get me a paper. You would go to the 7-Eleven or convenience store. Yeah, we don't sell the paper. You go to the grocery store. Yeah, we don't sell the paper. You go to Barnes and Nobles. Yeah, we don't sell the paper.
It's all gone.
Exactly.
It's completely gone. And now it's being replaced by Twitter, Instagram. Those are the new places to consume news. And
Everything's in your hand,
exactly.
right there on your phone.
Exactly. And being in Texas Southern, we were in the school of communication, we were mostly taught how to deliver news a traditional way. Mm-hmm. And some professors here, they didn't really get the full viewpoint of how media is changing now. It's like we have to teach them that, hey, everything's on the phone now. We don't need to write the regular way. It's different. And that's why I tell people all the time, you only need 3 things to start your own production company or own media network. And that's a smartphone, a microphone, and a social media account. And if you have those 3, the sky is limitless for you. I tell people this all the time, because it's not that hard to start. It's really not. And all you have to do is portray news and have a strong online presence, like you said, and you're good. UFM, we made several news publications such as Bleacher Report, the New York Times, Sports Illustrated, just for breaking news. You guys know the Ed Reed situation that happened at Bethune-Cookman? Guess who was the first outlet to post that news? There was another time too where LeBron James was at an AAU tournament and he was getting into it with a PA announcer. And usually on Twitter, it's so reactionary. People create their own narratives and just try to spin it, whatever. When we posted the headline, we made sure to say LeBron wants to make it known that it's about his son, not about him. And the reason he got upset is that the PA announcer was saying, "Oh, Bronny is getting free throws because he's LeBron's son." And he said it out loud for the people to hear. LeBron was ticked off. So he came up to the PA announcer, let him know his mind. And we found a video and posted it immediately. We got featured on several articles about it. It's simple stuff that we learned in intro to broadcast journalism. Basic information. So it's really important to have that online presence. And like you said with Threads, I'm still trying to figure out how to use that app. I mean, it's in its infant stage, so I'm pretty sure it's difficult. But things like that, it's important to stay on top of the media world because it's an evolving field. Everything is changing. And who's to say for 30 years from now it's going to be a different thing that we consume? But as a marketer or as somebody with a media network, it's important to adapt and to be on top of the game in order to not get left behind. Because in an industry like this, if you're still doing the old school way, you're not going to grow.
The one old school aspect you have to always consider, no matter which side of the coin you're on, is you have to make sure that the outlet that you are looking at is following those journalistic practices that he was talking about. Because I hate to use the term, there's so much fake news that's out there, and especially with branding, because the other side of the coin with going from the print media to now digital, using that term I talked about before, was the gatekeepers. Before there was an era where when you saw, from my era, when you saw Dan Rathers come on for 60 Minutes, you trusted what he said because CBS was not just going to let anyone air anything without some vested research and confirming facts. Unfortunately, because of those three things you just said you need, any and everybody can put anything on the internet, and unfortunately, as the day goes by, less and less people feel they have the responsibility themselves to vet what they're reading before they retweet it out as fact.
Exactly.
I can't tell you enough how many times I don't even want to retweet stuff anymore unless I know it's from a certain entity. And again, going back to Twitter and what everything Elon did with the check marks and knowing who's verified and who not, you really have to really double take and make sure you're looking at an authorized, verified account, because you just can't trust everything that's put out there. So no, everything he said is completely correct. It's a great time to be a content creator. You can really, and also like, especially what you're talking about for HBCUs, with the technology where it is now and a lot of those other gatekeepers removed, you can tell your own narrative. You don't need to rely on the local news to come do your highlights to get that out to your fan base, your constituents, your alumni. You've got a communication school, or you've got some sports information department, or students who are volunteering. You can produce your own highlights. You could, if you have the right equipment, your stuff will look as good as any other major outlet. You just got to be consistent with your, first you have to develop a strategy and a plan and just stick to it. You're not going to have 100,000 followers overnight. You've got to first let people know you're out there. You've got to consistently produce good content, because I hate so many times where you see people will start, you'll see content, it'll come out daily, and it's every other day, and it might be once a week. Then it's like, if I see it at all, and because it's hard and it is a grind. You can talk about it more than me, but it's an avenue that more of our HBCUs should be taking advantage of to tell our story.
I'm saying, and the two things that you said, the sources, that is an extremely important part when it comes to reporting news, because we live in a society nowadays that parody accounts on Twitter is being taken for real exact news. And I'm going back to ESPN again. There was so many times I watched a segment, they were regurgitating news being spoken from parody accounts. If you go on there, it obviously says the name on there. It obviously says it has 2,000 followers, not a big group surrounding them. But people are so lazy when it comes to researching news that they see it. Oh, it's interesting. Boom, I'm gonna put it on TV. Everybody starts to believe it. There was one tweet that was on there that I kind of forgot who it was by, but it was about James Harden and Kyrie playing one-on-one, and when Harden got beat, he was crying. They said it on Undisputed. And I was thinking, you are a mainstream media outlet. How the heck do you fall for something like a fake tweet on Twitter? Like, you're not doing your due diligence. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because people get so easily fooled nowadays because of that. And to your point about HBCUs, if only all of our institutions could utilize a power that not only just me, but other young guys in their own institutions have over social media, we will be a lot bigger than what we are. And I hate to use Jackson State as a viewpoint, but at the same time, there's a lot of people in FAMU, people in Alcorn. There's guys with their own media network, but they're not getting the focus that they should. Every time they approach somebody that's older, been in the game for a long time, they dismiss them saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're still young. You still got a lot to learn." But they have the biggest reach out of everybody in school. If we can utilize that in order to promote our sports teams, we create our own exposure right then and there. And it's so simple for us to do.
That's true. Great point. Talk a little bit about, I guess you touched on this a little bit, strategies. Because as you said, there are a lot of parody accounts out there. So what are the strategies you use to verify the information that you're getting? From your standpoint, at your previous institution, a lot of times the story was created by what was happening on campus. But then there would be somebody who would twist it and put it out there, and that would be taken as the real story.
So when I said the good, the bad, and the ugly, you knew exactly what I was talking about.
Wow.
So in, was that 16? There was a student protest at my former institution, centered around several main topics, but this one instance, a student in an open forum was questioning a policy, and the administrators told her that the policy was actually something else. And in the middle of what wasn't a real back and forth, it was similar to this. They were on a panel, they were speaking, they called on the student to ask her question, she asked her question, and in that administrator's response, the student pulled up, because to your point, students are on their phones, they've got the access. The student pulled up what the policy, as stated on the website, said, cut off the administrator, and said, well, actually, the policy on the website says X, Y, Z. At that point, the administrator kind of fell back into the teacher mode and said, we haven't cut you off. Please stop talking. We're not going to do this back and forth. We're going to have a conversation. Well, unfortunately, the student who, a separate student who was capturing this on Snapchat or Instagram, whichever, didn't get those important 15 seconds before, only had the clip starting from the young lady, please stop talking. That then went viral, went to the local news, and it was reported that the university president was telling students to shut up in an open dialogue in this town hall. And needless to say, I was in another meeting, which I was quickly called out of, and was apprised of the situation and said to fix it. So, journalism 101, I called the newsroom, asked to speak to the news director, and they were like, oh, yeah, we got it, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I just asked the gentleman one simple question. Do you have a secondary source to confirm what happened prior to that video being recorded? Because I was in the room. I know exactly what happened. I can give you the full play-by-play. Can your reporter who reported this? Hear that popping? That was what I heard on the phone. It was like, I could just hear it and imagine going, damn. Story got pulled. I hated the situation, but it worked out in my favor because at the time I was the interim director of university relations. Shortly thereafter, I got promoted and had the job full time because the news story got pulled. The channel had to run a full retraction. and they ended up reposting the story, but they posted it with this clip from here says XYZ. I said, okay, that's fine. You can post that, you can share that, but you can't state what you said originally. So to your point, that's how you have to kind of manage these situations and verify, because you have to have 2 and 3 and 4 sources. Like he said, people are taking parody accounts and running with it. And as I mentioned before, with specifically Twitter, I think Instagram and Facebook still are doing their blue checks, how they have it historically. You really have to do your due diligence and look and see, is this someone's real account? How long have they been tweeting? Like you said, a one good judgment, how many followers do they have? How many tweets do they have? Because I mean, if you've been on Twitter a long time, you should have several 100,000 tweets by now, depending who you are. But you've got to really do your research, because the moment you get that stink on you that you are, like to his point about Undisputed and ESPN, they can laugh it off, move away. Some poor assistant producer probably got fired, but from an entity, ESPN can take that shot. As a smaller institution or an entrepreneur, one and done. You're gonna get written off as, oh, you don't know what they're doing. They don't practice good journalistic integrity.
And the bad part about that thing is people have such a distinct rush of being first.
Yes.
Instead of actually getting the full sources, citing your sources, and establishing, hey, I did all the research and due diligence for me to even portray the story. It's all about being first. I feel like that's really just something that's messed up the industry as a whole.
Let me stop you right there. And that's the last break we just had. Everybody heard about what happened in Vegas with Britney Spears and Wemba. Have you guys seen the update?
Yes.
Now, of course, everyone's got me. That's crazy. We got a video of Britney Spears slapping herself inadvertently in Vegas, but no one has any video of what happened to Tupac. That's crazy. But Wemba, it looks like now, because originally it was being reported that Britney Spears said she got hit, but in the video, if you will, she reached out to Wemba, and when the security guard brushed her off, she hit herself in the face. So now that whole narrative has been flipped. So as you said, everyone was so quick to be first, and Britney Spears is supposed to be pressing charges and blah, 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 blah.
And that's why some stories I try. It is always good to shut up from stories sometimes. You don't have to report every single thing, because news come out every single day about specific subjects. Mm-hmm. But like I said, people are so drunk with the thought of being first, or I was the first person to do this, or I did it my own way. Like, you have to stop, be still, and look at the research.
It's what you said before. It's the art of the storytelling. In our journalism school, we were always taught, unless you have like those facts and the concrete information, it's the weatherman approach, right? When you see the weather person, it's going to be it's going to be a storm over here, right? You're not saying it's coming to your address. If they had just initially reported there was an altercation between Britney Spears and Wemba's entourage and security, now, if how you interpret and jump to those conclusions, that's on you. But to everyone who initially reported that she was assaulted by his security team, now you look a little less, because now that more information has come out. I mean, it's the Las Vegas Strip. It's a million. How many cameras are out there? Come on. You knew someone had it. And all we've seen so far is someone's cell phone footage from 50 feet away.
That's what makes it really so tricky. And like I said, just being first instead of just breaking down the information that you have in order to portray the most accurate news possible. And TV networks even follow the same formula. But the bad thing is they don't have no accountability to say when they were wrong. They just put the news out there and say, oh, my word is long, let's move on to the next subject. Whereas nobody reporting on, oh, somebody has been in this place at a certain time and said, oh, she slapped herself. They're not going to report that. Mm-hmm. Because the ratings already came in from her being slapped.
Yep.
So if you say she slapped herself,
to go back to the analogy with the newspaper, you would always see the headlines big and bold on the front, top of fold, but you always see they would bury the retraction or the correction page 8
Right.
in like, gotta get your glasses on print to be like, wait, we incorrectly reported such and such and such on such and such. No one ever sees that. It doesn't get the same level of veracity. So you've got to, again, when you're producing your own, you got to be sure what you're saying is accurate. And then again, on the opposite side, if you're managing a brand of an institution or a company, you've got to hold them accountable to make sure what they're saying is correct. Otherwise, it could make or break you.
And that goes to evolving, credibility, things like that. So as a newbie in the business, relatively, not making sure you're having the right information, so you may not be first, but also being credible. I mean, a lot of people weigh those differently. You know, it's like, okay, I want to be first, and if it's not right, I'll go back and fix it later. But I had it out there first. Which one, in this day and time, do you think has more weight with the public? Is it the credibility, or is it being fast, or does it depend on the demographic that you're talking to?
I think it's a loaded question. I think at first it really depends with who the audience is, because an older generation, they want that credibility. To his astute point before, the younger generation, they want to know it now. They're like, oh well, I'll clean it up later, or I'll figure it out later. Or if it's important and they change it, I'll hear about it. If it wasn't that important, but you get into that scenario, people beginning to base their opinions and knee-jerk reactions off wrong information, which then ultimately makes you as the consumer wrong or look ignorant. So it's very touchy. I mean, if you ask me personally, so should all credibility 100%. But realistically, in the microwave world we live in, it doesn't always pull through.
And it's also, a lot of times with the headlines, it's just clickbait. You see the headline, then you get into the story and say, well, this is not what that was talking about. It's something totally different.
And that's what I was kind of saying before about like the Stephen A's and the Skip Baylesses. It's all clickbait, especially then because they need viewers, or they need you to come to their website for monetization. But no, it's all clickbait. It's all headlines. It's funny. Like looking back when I was younger, going through the grocery store, you would see like the National Enquirer, all that tabloid media on the rack right before you're about to check out. And like my parents would be like, yeah, don't leave that over there. Yeah, fast forward 30 some odd years, and that is the style of journalism now. Because you don't even, TMZ and all that. It's sad to say, I remember when you used to hear stuff on TMZ, you'd be like, whatever. Now TMZ is to the point where they're breaking news, right. But to your point, like with the whole Kobe Bryant situation, they broke news. And there's also other reasons why you don't always report stuff right away, because there are policies in place, like i.e. with Kobe situation, typically before the media reports on some of this stuff, they want to make sure that they contact the families to let them know. You finding out on social media that your loved one is dead, like that's tough. Yeah. But again, it's all about what's important to you as a journalist or as a company or the company that you work for.
And the thing that attributes to that microwave type of effect, my generation wants everything so fast, our attention span has gone down during year after year after year. Apps like TikTok, it adds to that. Once you look into the app, you see a minute, 30 minutes, you see a minute 30 videos, and you think, oh, that's a whole story. But nobody has the attention span to sit down and actually read a whole article, to read a book.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times.
140 characters, you can't get all of the information.
Exactly. And I can't tell you how many guys my age that I speak to, they hate to read. That's shocking to me. Like, why do you hate to learn more?
Historically, they didn't want us to have the ability to learn how to read, but yes. I'll get off my soapbox.
There we go. No, you hit the nail on the head, because it's almost like we're downgrading as far as processing information. We don't like to sit and read like the way newspapers died off. I remember my grandpa used to sit down on a chair, read the whole front and back of the newspaper, turn, read for a whole 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And I did the same thing, but nowadays, people my age, we neglect stuff like that. And since everything is on our phone, we can just look at a minute video and think, oh, that's a whole story. But that's the thing that's killing us as a society. And that's the reason why clickbait or parody accounts, they're able to run them up, because they post stuff out quick, but we don't have to do diligence enough to research. We think, oh, that's the whole truth. That's really what's killing us nowadays.
Yep.
So from your personal standpoint, where do you think this is going? How should we monitor our personal brands?
I think you monitor your personal brands first and foremost by kind of doing what we both have talked about. It's important for you to create your own narrative, so that's why it's important for you, depending in your respective field. In this one, in sports, it's important for each individual, each team, organization, whatever. How you combat fake news is you produce your own news. You tell your story, because then there may be either no coverage at all, or if it's counter coverage, at least you've presented. You've had the complete control of putting out as much as you wanted. No one limited you to 140 characters. No one limited you to 30-second soundbite or a 90-second package. You're not in it for the ratings per se. You're in it for the education and the awareness of your brand, your team, etc. That's how you combat it, because you can always say, oh, well, I heard such and such. Oh, well, you did? Well, here's the full story.
I feel like that's really a tough question to answer because, like we touched on before, our field is forever evolving. There's going to be new things coming out every year. Like, for example, AI is being implemented.
That's scary.
And I was talking with my team about it earlier today because I want to somehow navigate our storytelling to AI, so to speak. I don't know the full information, but it's something I really want to adapt to. But as far as consuming information, we just have to keep being diligent on storytelling and not leaving any facts out.
Mm-hmm.
But the negative part to that is small media networks like myself and what I have, it's going to take a long time for us to blow up because everybody's used to the microwave effect. Everybody wants the information now, within 30 seconds, like I said before, and it's extremely difficult for us to give a full story to a society that has a low attention span. Nobody has the time to just sit down and read the whole information. But with us, that's the thing that's going to make us more unique in the long run, because as far as the market is oversaturated with that type of, news, like presented news and everything, we start to stand out more. And if everybody wants the full information, they go to us and say, oh, okay, that guy has a quick brief of the story. This guy has a whole book as to why the situation happened the way it was. But
That's credibility.
exactly, and that's where it comes to play. But it's a difficult outlook because we don't know the future. That's the truth. But it's important for us as time progresses, we have to be adaptive as well to what we're dealing with.
Any questions from the audience? Any closing remarks, gentlemen? Oh, I'm sorry.
When creating, like you have your own, I have my own business. So when I'm creating what I want my narrative to be, to get my information out to what I want people to know about me, how do you, or what is the plan or strategy in doing that? I know the message I want to get out. How do I get it to the masses the best? Like you said, if I want to speak to the parents, I want the parents to know, I'm going to put it on Facebook and boost it and do all the Google and do all that, right? And then I have to go to practice and make a TikTok with the kids so that they repost, blow it up, and then that medium parent group will be my Instagram. But if I wanted to reach them all, then how do I begin to create a strategy to do that?
One thing I will say is you need to do an extensive amount of studying. And what my mentor told me from Twitter, he told me algorithm is king. When it comes to writing keywords on Twitter or saying a certain article, you have to be really specific to your headline in order to reach a broad audience. Like, for example, with the Ed Reed situation, I put down Ed Reed complains about the situation of HBCUs. And those are several keywords. Ed Reed, Baltimore Ravens players, HBCUs, which is a broad community in itself. And if you keep using stuff like that, that's how you're able to grow. But there's really no specific formula as to how to do it. But as long as you keep it trained that information and don't tell, like if you don't leave any facts out, that's how you're able to grow. But you have to learn the algorithm of each space. And that's why we say with Threads, we're still trying to figure that out. Because the algorithm is in shambles at this point.
Right.
Everybody's brand new. But once you read articles and do extensive research on it, that's how you're able to master it. And it's through trial and error as well. Yep, because there's no perfect plan to this. You just gotta go out there and present news. That's a simple thing too, really.
So for example, to his point with algorithms, we can talk about Facebook, and this may be a little dated. I haven't looked at the algorithm in a good bit, but when I was working prior to my previous institution, I was working for a commercial radio cluster in Virginia Beach, and we did some extensive algorithm training. And one of the things they taught us was like Facebook, for example. Like he said, that his generation, they look at it like the newspaper. When do people usually look at the newspaper? In the morning, right? So for Facebook, if you want to get maximum reach, post yourself between 6 and 8 o'clock in the morning. What happens between 6 and 8 o'clock in the morning? People on their morning commute. So if you're in a city like, Houston, New York, anywhere where there's mass transit, like DC, you're on the metro, what do people do the whole time they're on no one wants to talk to anybody, everyone's got their AirPods in and they're on their phone. That's what they're checking their news. When's the other best time to get them? 5 and 7 for the commute home. Also, you got that window during lunch where people are going to be at lunch looking. Also, on the weekends, it's completely different because on the weekends, people typically like to sleep in a little bit more. You might go to Home Depot, have an afternoon project. You get them in that early to late morning, early afternoon. Like there's different strategies of when people are on. Like one other example, like for Twitter, especially if you want to get Black Twitter, like during like the BT Awards or any like major event, people are gonna be on because people used to just socially. I mean, that was my favorite part of the BT Awards like 10 years ago. Oh boy, I'm on here. We're all coming. We're throwing jokes at each other. That's how you would get mass exposure. So you have to know who your audience is, which I think you've already established. Also look for people who have high social capital in those arenas. So like, for example, if I'm going to put something for homecoming, every class, every era had that popular guy, popular girl. I'm trying to get the Greeks. There was that one dude that everybody just knew. Bring him into your circle. Like for example, if it like when I was at my previous institution for homecoming, we would talk to certain people like, "Hey, we'll give you a few extra tickets. Post the flyer for us. Just help us get our reach out. Because once you get it out, everyone's gonna pick up on it. But you got to identify those people with high social capital that are relative to your field or your audience. It's gonna be different for everything. So it may be students. It may be alumni, it may be a parent, because you may have a parent in your organization that is just that mom in the PTA. Like everybody knows everybody's listening to her. Like you just gotta try to identify who those people are. And if you don't have those individuals, sometimes you gotta go old school with your depending on what the situation is. If it's like a team, like the new Jumbotron they're putting here, you gotta put stuff on the Jumbotron. Follow us. Here are our social channels. You do an email blast. Let people know, hey, get up to date. Like, yes, we might send these out weekly, quarterly. Follow us here. You got to go old school guerrilla, but it all builds up.
And to add on to what he says, you also got to have a mastery of SEO, which is search engine optimization. And that's a big thing a lot of these companies are pushing now. How are you able to extend their audience using that strategy? And just like for me on Instagram, when I post my podcast episodes, I post them at 12 o'clock. No later, no earlier. But that's when all of my followers are the most engaging. And also, like you said too, if you have a newsletter, my friend Jamel under UFM, he has his own newsletter. So as far as we have 4 podcasts, he has a newsletter. It's all the versatility that we could bring to our audience. That way, once they look at our stuff, they will never get bored. Because if they don't feel like looking at a podcast, they can read something. If they don't feel like doing that, they can look at a video we created or a documentary. So you just still gotta be diverse and establish SEO. That's the most important thing, honestly.
Thank you.
No problem.
Anyone else? Parting words, gentlemen, about this branding thing?
Just keep your ear to the ground. There's always something new coming, and get up on threads. It's new. It's next.
Don't be afraid. Because I feel like that's the number one thing that's holding people back when starting a brand. It's that certain fear of, do I sound stupid to people, or do people don't believe what I say? Screw that. Go out there and stick your neck out. And as a journalist, as myself, you have to have that fearlessness in order to thrive. If you ask a stupid question, okay, go in the back, study, go back again. Just never give up. So if any of you guys want to start a brand, today's the perfect day. Go out there.
To piggyback off that, don't be scared just because you have 5 followers. Everyone
Start somewhere.
start somewhere.
Amen.
All right, go out and start your brand. You got 2 experts here, so you can reach out to them.
Experts.
Yes. Reach out to them for that information to get your brand started. We're gonna start mine too.
We already did.
I know.
It's my boss, y'all, if y'all didn't know.
That will conclude this session. Thank you, gentlemen.